Welcome everyone to our first webinar on demand training for NEC Backup as a Service. Today we're going to talk about just an introduction to backup. I'm Rebecca Selby, the marketing manager here at Optus. I do want to quickly go over that if you have any questions from your account manager from Optus, here are their contact information. So we've got Craig, Kevin, Ben, and Jeff, and then Christy Waddell is our sales manager. So feel free to contact them at any time with questions that you have. And then if you're not sure who to contact, you can always email info@optusinc.com. That comes directly to the marketing team. And we can look at your request and get you pointed in the right direction. So I want to introduce Mike Midge from NEC today. He will be conducting our training. So Mike, take it away.
Hey, Rebecca, thank you for the opportunity to do this 5-part mini-series. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do kind of what we call the 101 of what is the terminology and basic principles of doing backup. We know that this is a new area for many of the Optus channel partners, and we want to provide the basic terminology of what is included in backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. So this is going to about a 20-minute mini-series. We'll be doing 5 parts in this mini-series, and as I mentioned today, we're going to be doing the terminology and some of the basic principles that are associated with that. So today we're going to cover briefly the backup architecture, the backup landscape, and the key backup terminologies that are used to go ahead and to deliver that service. Also, if you have any questions, you can reach back out to the Optus team as Rebecca had outlined in this after, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. Okay, so our goal is to provide a basic introduction to the backup architecture, landscape, and key terminology. We'll cover the basic backup architecture, including backup software, the agents, and how replication works. And we'll take these concepts forward into an actual landscape describing the different types of agents and describe more about how the agents and the backup software work together. Finally, as I mentioned, we'll cover some of the backup terminology used to build the case for delivering a managed backup service. So let's first look at, start with the backup architecture. It's comprised of 2 systems that include a backup server and a source computer. On the backup server, there is backup software that manages all aspects of the backup. On the source computer, there is an agent software, which is loaded and takes direction from the backup software. The backup software provides direction or commands to the agent that is running on the source computer to access the data and to initiate the backup of the data to the backup server storage. This is the basic backup architecture that is comprised. Again, 2 systems. There's a backup server and there's a source computer. The source computer can be clients, it can be servers, it can be any type of a device. And there's an agent that is loaded on that device that takes commands from the backup software and then initiates the backup and ensures that the backup is going to take place. So again, 2 parts to the environment comprise the basic backup architecture. The landscape, which starts with the customer environment, is comprised of clients that can be on-prem or can be hybrid, such as with Office 365. Also, servers that are comprised of virtual servers, file or non-virtualized servers, and applications. Additionally, many firms have network storage that is shared. It's not dedicated to any single system, and it's important to know the entire landscape of all the data that's identified in the organization so that it can all be backed up correctly and, most importantly, completely. So there can be 3 key areas inside the landscape: the clients, the servers, and potentially the network storage. Additionally, all of these systems talk to the backup server, which typically has its own local storage. And that's important to have separate storage for doing backups than the rest of the environment to ensure that it's protected. To ensure the data is transferred, the systems talk to the backup server, which typically has the local storage. And to transfer the data off premise, the backup server will initiate that to the offsite environment in the event that it is in a hybrid space. There's no reason to bring the data into the customer environment if the customer is using Office 365. We can simply get that data and get it completely out of the hybrid environment by going directly to the offsite environment, as well as the data can be transferred from the backup server over to the offsite environment through the backup device. This communication is really important because it can be done in an offline fashion where the data in the offsite location cannot be directly accessed from the corporate network. This ensures that data is protected. Additionally, applications that are completely backed up then can be recovered in the recovery environment, so that in the event that anything happens in the customer environment, whether it be a disaster recovery, whether it be potentially ransomware, or even if a server or a laptop goes out, we can recover those services in the cloud environment and then be able to deliver those services remotely. So to wrap it up, it's very important that the entire landscape is backed up. This allows the customers to simplify the data inventory. They're not looking to see if there's data that's sitting in Office 365 or a user in Office 365, as well as possibly they had a shared system or application access, that everything for that specific user is being backed up. And it then also enables the ability to deliver a simplified disaster recovery solution. You're not having to bring up customers or bring customers up in multiple different locations, which adds a lot of complexity. So let's look at some of the key terminology that's associated with doing backup. This will assist you in talking with your clients and help to build the case for a managed backup service. We'll deep dive into each of the terms in the following slide, but before we do that, let's examine the relevance to each area. The 3-2-1 rule is an industry recognized rule which identifies why offsite storage is required. We'll get into that in just a minute, but it's an important rule because we see that a large number of clients that are out there are not following that. They're not even familiar with what that rule is to protect their data. Another term that we want to introduce is what's called deduplication. This is important because it provides savings to the customers in terms of how they're storing and backing up their data. We're going to talk about that in more depth. Another term that's really important is completeness. This ensures that all of the data that is in the customer environment is backed up. So that ensures that you don't have to go around looking for it. You don't have to, there's no manual process behind the scenes to ensure that the data can be restored. There's a lot of systems out there that don't deliver the completeness aspect and they only deliver one part of it. So we're going to cover that because of the need to make sure that you've got a complete backup environment. There's the backup policy. This is also a great opportunity to talk about from a consultation standpoint with a customer. Do they know where their deficiencies are? We'll talk about what's included in that. And then we'll wrap up the last terminology with the recovery point objective, what's called RPO. That more or less tells you how much data could be lost that the company agrees to. A lot of times people don't do that. They don't know how much data could be lost and they don't know, they don't have a policy for it. That's incorporated in the backup policy, and it is important because as you deploy a backup solution, there has to be standards that are identified, and we'll cover that. The last point that we're going to cover is the recovery time objective. In other words, how fast can we restore an environment? It may not have the data that may be current, which is okay if that's in the recovery point objective, but they're at least able to get back up and maybe send an email. They may not have all the email in their mailbox, but at least they can go ahead and bring it back up and then do some level of processing. So we're going to cover each one of these as we go forward. So let's look at what is the 3-2-1 rule. The 3-2-1 rule is a best practice. And we're actually referencing the University of Pennsylvania Data Management Storage in the little link at the bottom. This is from them. That basically says that as a best practice to back up your data, you should keep 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of storage media, and 1 copy should be kept off-site. So this is an industry standard that's followed, that for all backup systems, if you're following the right rule, you should be deploying this. So the way that would work is that you've got 3 copies of the data that's sitting, 1 primary and at least 2 backups. At least 2. Many, by definition, some companies will set up that we have at least 30 days of backups. But at a minimum, you want to have 3 copies, 1 that you're operating of and at least 2 of the backup side. And again, that can be adjusted. The second point is that you've got it on 2 different types of storage. Remember in the landscape that we showed earlier that you're going to have your storage that's used online, but you need to have a secondary storage that is doing your backup to. You don't want to be doing your backups to your primary storage. That induces a lot of risk, and it also induces a lot of what we call cybersecurity threat, because if you can get to 1 storage unit, you can get to the backup data also. So you want to keep the storage for your backups separately. And then the third point is that you want to also get 1 of the copies transmitted offsite, so that in the event of any of the systems that are on premise are compromised, that you've got a copy of the data that's secure and it's offsite. The solution areas that we'll be talking to you about in future training sessions will be around how NEC solution addresses the secondary storage for on-site and the off-site storage. And again, that the off-site storage provides that protection from risks such as ransomware, theft, lab fires, or any type of natural disaster. Okay, let's move on to the next terminology, which is deduplication. And this is a technique that is used to eliminate duplicate copies of repeating data. And the important aspect to this is that it improves physical storage utilization. Now, it's not so important if you were not thinking about online data, not backups. But when you think about backups, you're having multiple copies and with a lot of the same data in it. And it's very, very important that you look at how that data is structured so you can reduce the physical aspects of it. In this case here, let's take a deeper look into how that technology benefits customers. We'll use an example of a small business that has, say, 15 employees and 2 storefronts. Each of the employees have a computer as well as the firm's server files and application. Each night a backup occurs, and for 30 days it would appear to have stored over 4 terabytes of data. That's the 4,000 gigabytes at the top. According to industry measurements, a high percentage of that data is redundant in 2 ways. The clients and the servers have the same operating system, the same Office applications, the same files, and as well as databases and applications. So the data does not change so much between the backups. Over 30 days, not so much really has changed. But through deduplication, the redundant data is removed and only stores the data that's unique. This is an actual case that the customer is logically storing 4 terabytes of data, yet actually they're only storing 700 gigabytes. So there's a lot of benefits to being able to utilize deduplication. One is that it reduces the amount of physical storage that's required. That's really important. It reduces the network bandwidth that's required to be able to move the data off premise. It speeds up the backup and the recovery process because not as much data has to be pulled. And in the summary, and the reason we really like to make sure deduplication is talked about, it saves the customer time and money. So real important concept is on deduplication. Another terminology that we're going to talk about is completeness. Completeness ensures that all data required to recover a system is performed as part of the backup. It's important to understand that without all of the data being backed up, systems cannot be completely restored. And you can see the types of data that needs to be backed up in just one computer, right? There's bootstrap data. This is how you start a system. That's really required in the event of a disaster recovery and you want to restore a data remotely. We need to know what that is. There's the file structure data. It's the data that structures how it's located on the computer. There's the driver binaries that are loaded that are tied to the operating system. Without them, and you may have a system that's running an older version of the operating system, you can't restore the data because it's not compatible. There's the operating system itself, right, which is required. There are configuration files, such as the registry through to the passwords, that without that information, even though you may have the data, a data file, you can't access it because you don't have the password data. There's the application programs, and this is important because there's different versions of the application programs that are out there. So even though you may have a file, you may not be able to open it because you need to have the right version of the application program that goes along with it. There's the traditional data files, and a lot of systems that are out there that do backup only back up the data files. They make a lot of assumptions. That's the reason why it's not necessarily complete. And the same thing also with databases. These are sophisticated data such as Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle or SAP, and they're associated to the application programs, and they have to go hand in hand with them to be able to restore it. So being able to have a complete backup that has all of the data in these types of areas, that's what's required to ensure that you can recover the system. And that's really what completeness is about, ensuring that you're getting all of the backup data. Now let's look at a backup policy. More often than not, we talk to a lot of firms that they say they have a backup policy, but they really don't have a good understanding of what that policy is. And this is important because it's key to being able to restore all the data successfully. And it includes the type of data that they have and where is the data stored. So this is important for them to understand in the event that you're running a hybrid cloud environment like Office 365. What type of data is being stored there? And do you have access to it in another location if other employees or parts of the company have access, need it? Second thing is, what's the procedure used to back the data up? We see a lot of situations, specifically like with Office 365, that they have a completely different procedure or system that's being used to back up that type of a data. That makes a real challenge for it. The other thing is the schedule. When and how often are the backups performed? That's a really important piece here to move forward. And that also ties into the RPO and RTO. Also, what is the priority in the event of a disaster to restore the data? You may not need to bring the email users up. What you're going to need to do is bring up the firewalls or other parts to be able to have the system available or the database to make sure that that happens. And then last but not least is the data retention in terms of the type, time to keep, and how to destroy the data. All of these are included in the backup policy. And when you work with a backup provider, they should be able to provide this to you. A lot of firms don't have it. And again, working through a managed service, we can provide that to the customer. The last but not least one is the recovery point objective and the recovery time objective. We talked about this. This information is captured in the backup policy, and it helps an organization understand how much data they can lose and how fast they can get back to operation. So if you look at this chart, this is a great way to say, what was the last time that I had the data as far back that was done, and how long does it take me to bring that back? So you really have two aspects to it from a disaster standpoint. How far back in time was the data last captured? And then how fast can I bring it back so that I have the operation inside? This is needed because it also helps to define what is going on with the system in terms of how fast and how frequent the backups occur, as well as then how frequent the systems are going back and forth in terms of delivering the disaster recovery kind of capability. Okay, this kind of wraps up at a high level some of the primary terms and concepts that are associated with the Backup 101, the first session. And Rebecca, I'd like to thank you today for setting up the session. And I look forward to the next one that we conduct in the following week.